This year's trade deadline had to have been one of the craziest deadlines in NBA history. Almost 10 All-Stars have been traded, and that includes a trade that was so bad that a GM had to hire full-time security at his house because he fears for his life. So many different big names have been moved, and there were multiple teams that came out winners. But that also means that there were multiple teams that came out losers. So I'll talk about the winners first, then the losers, and then finally the teams that could go either way. Starting with the Lakers, who are obviously the biggest winner of the entire deadline for acquiring a 25-year-old superstar point guard in the middle of his prime. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this trade, mainly because it's all everyone has been talking about for the past few days, although there is a good reason for that. However, the Lakers didn't stop there. They completely revamped their team. They slightly overpaid for Mark Williams, but because they massively underpaid for Luka, then it's honestly fine, especially if that's the only big that was available. And at the time of me making this video, the Lakers do still have an open roster spot, so they'll be looking to add one more name in the buyout market to complete the roster. Plus, let me remind you that Mark Williams is actually younger than rookie Dalton Knecht that they just traded to get him. The Lakers started the season with D'Angelo Russell and somehow ended it with Luka Dončić, just unreal. But another massive winner is De'Aaron Fox in the San Antonio Spurs. Fox has already made his debut, and it was one of the best debuts we've seen in a long time. He's a great addition to the team, but what makes them massive winners is the fact that they were able to keep Stephon Castle, Devin Vassell, and Jeremy Sohan. They did have to give up 3 first-round picks, but when you actually take a deeper look into them, really only one of them is a true first-rounder. They now have several options at point guard, especially once you factor in Chris Paul. This gives them multiple options going forward, and the Spurs are gonna be very scary. Another team that I consider winners after making a pretty massive trade is the Miami Heat. Them actually trading Jimmy and putting an end to the chaos is a win in of itself. They were able to get a decent return for a 35-year-old even though they really didn't have much leverage whatsoever. They still have their core and have multiple new pieces to try and build for the future. Then there's the Washington Wizards, who I also consider to be winners. They were able to offload Kyle Kuzma, which gives them more flexibility, plus they were able to get multiple picks and Marcus Smart. Other than the Kuzma trade, they didn't do anything extremely notable, but them getting a good amount of pieces when nobody really expected them to is a W in my book. The Cleveland Cavaliers are definitely winners as well. One of, if not their biggest need, was a wing defender, and that's exactly what they got. Although they did give up the winningest player of the 2020s in George Niang. Other than that, Karis LeVert, a few pick swaps, and a few second-round picks for DeAndre Hunter is honestly a steal. And even though Donovan Mitchell said that the team was just fine with what they had, DeAndre Hunter is going to help them out a lot, especially come playoff time. The Hornets are another team that I would consider winners. They took on Jusuf Nurkic's contract, but they were able to get a decent first-round pick out of it, and then obviously the Mark Williams trade is the one everyone's talking about. I think that trade is a win-win for both teams. Mark Williams is a good player, but he does have a history of injuries, and in return they got a 2031 first-round pick, a 2030 pick swap, Cam Reddish, and Dalton Knecht, who has been pretty good. Between the picks and the players they got, I definitely think they came out of this year's trade deadline winners. This one might be a massive hot take, but I also have the Milwaukee Bucks as winners. I know Bucks fans have a lot of love for Chris Middleton, and rightfully so, but adding Kyle Kuzma does have its advantages. If there was a better option, then it's an L, but if this was really the only option, then it's definitely a win. Yes, Kyle Kuzma has looked absolutely atrocious on the Wizards, but really who on the Wizards hasn't looked atrocious? I watched Kyle Kuzma have some really impactful games the year the Lakers won the championship, and I'm banking on that still being in him. Middleton has had some good games this year, but with his health and consistency, I think they made a decent decision. They're now also under the second apron, and I feel like at worst this is just a lateral move. But I would call the Toronto Raptors winners too. The fact that they were able to get Brandon Ingram for what they did has to make them a winner. Ingram is still an all-star caliber player and one of the best mid-range scorers in the league. We also can't forget that he's only 27 years old. I don't know why it feels like he's so much older than that, but he's in the middle of his prime. This trade kind of banks on some of the other star players on the team to make leaps in the coming years, but it was definitely a good move, especially for the price. Then there's the Utah Jazz, who really didn't do anything significant, but somehow walked away from this year's trade deadline with multiple picks, including the 2031 Suns pick, which could be really good. Again, they didn't do anything crazy, but managed to grab some pretty big assets. Same thing with the Thunder. They didn't really make any moves, but they were on the receiving end of salary dumps for more picks while being the #1 seed in the West. You usually see teams dumping off salaries to bad teams who aren't trying to win. However, Sam Presti is built different and is still managing to collect draft picks even while being one of the best teams in the league. They could have made a bigger move, but them getting back Chet Holmgren is basically their deadline acquisition. But that now brings us to the teams that I would consider losers. Again, at the end, I will have some other teams that could go either way as well. I consider the Lakers massive winners for their whole trade deadline, but they're massive winners off one trade alone. So of course that makes the team on the other side of that trade massive losers, and that's the Dallas Mavericks. They not only gave up one of the best players in the league in a win-now move, but they also lost the trust of their entire fan base. Anthony Davis is elite, and I think Max Christie has a ton of potential, but getting rid of a player that's supposed to be the future of your team for the next 10 years is crazy. Mavs fans were invested on his journey to become a champion, and this being the way it ends is honestly just sad. That trade was so bad that fans are saying the only possible scenario where this makes sense is if Adam Silver was the one behind it. When you make such a bad trade that people are questioning the integrity of the league, then that makes you by far the biggest loser of the deadline. Next is the Chicago Bulls. Going into the deadline, it was pretty obvious they were going to get rid of Zach LaVine, but them walking away with just one first-round pick is unfortunate. I was all for the Bulls selling Zach and finally entering a rebuild that they should have done a long time ago, but instead they got one first-round pick, which was their own pick by the way, they just got it back, and 3 players that are next to irrelevant. I don't know if that's simply the best offer they got or what, either way it's a horrible return. In the summer, Zach LaVine's contract was definitely hurting his trade value, but he's actually been extremely good this season, so that contract isn't nearly as bad as it once looked. The Atlanta Hawks are another big-time loser. They made 3 trades, and I genuinely think that they lost all of them. Giving up a 27-year-old DeAndre Hunter for a couple second-round picks and pick swaps is not good at all. Karis LeVert and George Niang aren't terrible, but Hunter has literally only been getting better, and you traded him within the conference to a team that really needed him. Plus, they got rid of Bogdanovich and 3 second-round picks for Terrence Mann and Bones Highland. By the way, they just cut Highland. I really have no idea what their plan is whatsoever. The next team is the Phoenix Suns, who are obviously a win-now team but didn't do anything at the deadline to win now. They were able to get rid of Nurkic for Cody Martin and Micic, but that cost them a first-round pick in the process. Bradley Beal didn't waive his no-trade clause, which really limited what they were able to do, and there's a real chance that this team doesn't even make the play-in. Just a rough situation to be in, but they literally put themselves in it, so I don't feel too bad. Now let's get into a couple teams I feel like could go either way, starting with the Warriors. They definitely feel the pressure to win now while Steph Curry is still there, and I don't blame them for trying to do so. Feels like it wasn't a trade that they wanted to do, but rather a trade they felt like they had to do. Even the way Steve Kerr was talking about it all, you could tell he wasn't the most excited about everything that went down. But they also lost some other pieces and a first-round pick. Steph Curry has been getting quadruple teamed literally the entire season and is struggling just to get open looks. Andrew Wiggins was playing pretty well, but he's not that caliber of player that teams have to focus on. Jimmy Butler is that caliber of player. I do fear that Jimmy and Draymond might be fighting by the team's third practice, but at the same time, it wouldn't surprise me if they somehow became best friends. I think the Warriors did get better with this trade, but does it make them contenders? Not really. The next team that I'm not really sure how I feel about is the Sacramento Kings. They basically swapped out De'Aaron Fox for Zach LaVine and multiple picks. They were also able to get 23-year-old Jake LaRavia, who has been an elite shooter this season on limited minutes for the Grizzlies. Them getting rid of De'Aaron Fox is definitely an L, but replacing him with Zach LaVine is really solid. There has been a whole lot going on behind the scenes that all started when they fired Mike Brown, so it felt like they were more dealing with the cards that they were dealt. Instead of continuing with an unhappy player that could walk in free agency, they were able to get a solid return for him. Plus, they were able to pick up Jonas Valanciunas for really not that much. Valanciunas by himself is definitely not something worth bragging about, but once you pair him next to another solid big, it makes it all worth it. Him and Domantas Sabonis should be able to work out pretty well together, not to mention Zach and DeMar literally played with each other on the Bulls. Then the final team I'm going to talk about in this video is the New Orleans Pelicans. The only real move they made at the deadline was the Brandon Ingram trade, and that's where I'm kind of in the middle. They were only able to get one first-round pick in the trade, but at the same time, I'm not really sure how many teams were truly interested in him. He's on his way towards free agency and has dealt with injuries, so there really isn't too much leverage. So depending on what the market actually looked like, this could be looked at as a win or a loss, it really just depends. But that about wraps up every team I wanted to talk about. There were a few teams I left out of the video that either didn't make any splashes, or teams that just kinda stayed quiet that could also go either way. But let me know what you think down in the comments, and please leave a like on the video to support the channel. Also subscribe if you're new for more basketball videos just like this one.